Thanks, Matt. Good evening, everybody. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to wear my glasses. I need a bit more, a special pair, but I do need it for reading. Thank you for inviting me to speak here this evening. I was trying to find a tenuous connection between myself and Sydney Moderns, and so I just went through the exhibition, and there's a wonderful journal down there called The Home, which looked to be the ultimate in luxury publishing at that period of time. And if anything, if there is a correlation, that's probably the one thing that I'm most apprehensive about in this day and age, is the continuation of truly luxurious and beautiful journals. The Vogue factor, this is really, this short speech that I have tonight is my journey, my personal journey, and which is I talk about in the Vogue factor. And it begins with my firing. It has to begin with that. It was so dramatic. I got very spectacularly fired last year. I'd had the company's licensed. Vogue's, I've been there for 25 years. Vogue's been licensed a number of times, currently licensed by Rupert Murdoch and News Limited, and this was a new CEO. I've had 8 CEOs throughout my career, so this was my 8th and consequently my last. I was fired. I had met with her once, but obviously they had a different plan for the future. And I was asked, after 27 years, to go pick up my handbag and leave the building without saying goodbye to my staff, who most of them, my assistant was like my little sister. We'd been working together for 13 years. The magazine was doing very well, but it's new times, and that's what you have to accept. Unfortunately, it seems to happen to Vogue editors. The press went to town. I remember leaving and going home to tell my family, and then going to a restaurant, and the phone was going crazy with the vultures that are the press, and it all started to come out. And I think it's interesting that the coverage, there were a lot of editors swept out at that particular time. I was the most high profile because I was with Vogue, and I think there is a seam of misogyny, and it's funny to make fun of a woman who's lost her job and her livelihood. It's funny if you were running a fashion magazine and you lost your job. Not so funny if you're the head of Channel 9, you step down. But for Vogue, it was, for me, it was personally, it was pretty intense. But I got used to the sort of, they were like, that came out of like the bloodshed in the corridors of the perfumed corridors with the stiletto heels and the blood. I was like, if you had just let me know, I could have written that better. And I could have just sent out a press release from Fairfax, from News, everywhere, and it would have read a lot better. The very next day, I was at a friend's house having a glass of champagne, because I thought that was pretty much the best thing you should do. And I got a phone call from Louise Adler at Melbourne University Press, and she said, would you like to write a book about your 27 years, essentially, in publishing? And I guess I was a bit shell-shocked, and I said, but do you know what happened to me yesterday? And she was like, duh. That's why I'm on the phone. I was like, of course. So she was up here for Sydney Writers' Festival, and we had breakfast, and she said, you should write a book. It would be very cathartic, and you would have a lot of stories. And it was such a wonderful project for me to get started on straight away, because what I felt was very important to take away from what had happened to me was that I couldn't let how it happened diminish what I had done in 25 years and my accomplishments. And the way people behave to you at the end is not a reflection of what you did and what you need to take away and need to be proud of, and it is what you do next that is going to bring you forward as a person. So, it was really, truly wonderful to be able to have that book to concentrate on. It was essentially started as a memoir, but what it ended up being was a slice of publishing history, a bit like what you're seeing here with Sydney Moderns, because by starting in 85, the way things were done in 85 to what publishing is now is so vastly different, and publishing now is changing on a daily basis. I mean, it's obvious that the internet has changed everything, but really, my book, although everyone was expecting a revenge book, was really quite nostalgic for the way that we used to do things in 1985 and what the fashion industry was then. And, not to get too hearts and strings about it, but I did like to put a kind of fuzzy feeling around it because it was a wonderful time. I grew up in the Sutherland Shire. I don't need to explain that to anybody. We've got puberty blues to explained that to us. And the first, all I wanted to do was leave the Sutherland Shire. No, you know, not to dismiss it, but at that point, you know, I was much more interested in the band scene. I was interested in punk, in literature and magazines, in popular culture, and that was, you know, the Shire wasn't really where I was going to get that from. So I left home when I was 16 and moved into the city. I moved straight into Darlinghurst. My poor mum, she went along with it because she knew I'd be all right. And that was, you know, really a seminal time in my life. I travelled overseas a lot, but for those years, 16 to 23, I was vitally interested in pop culture, and we had no money. We shopped in disposal stores and op shops, and I think it's so funny now. The girls come in when I would be interviewing girls at Vogue, and they'd come in and they were like 20, and you know, you'd be asking about something. Like, I like Alexander Wang, I like Givenchy, and you're like, you shouldn't even know about that. You should be in op shops and making things and wearing crazy clothes. It's not that label obsession that came later, which I guess we all contributed to, including myself. But when I ever did interview girls at Vogue, and that was endless because everybody wanted to work at Vogue, was, you know, if they said they had a passion for fashion, I was always highly dubious. I wanted them to have a passion for art, for books, for culture, for literature, for dance, for theatre, for costume design, anything but, as a matter of fact, fashion, unless you had, you know, studied Balenciaga's early work or whatever. I didn't want people who were obsessed with labels, and I still stand by that. And that you know, the whole there's been a seismic shift in terms of people's understanding of what fashion is. So I'd been doing that for a while. Then I saw a job in the paper, as they did then, for the receptionist at Vogue. I was working in a bookstore, and I thought, wouldn't that be, what an entree that would be into the world of Vogue. So I went to the interview, and the woman who interviewed me, she's probably in her sort of late 60s, glamorous as like white blonde hair, blue eyes, great legs. She was gorgeous. It was about 6 o'clock at night, and she was drinking, she had a teacup, and I'm sure it was gin. I'm absolutely sure it was gin. I loved her immediately. And she hired me, and I was the last of 20 girls, and she hired me to be on the reception desk. And I started the next day, and the first day that I started on the reception desk was male model casting day. So I was like, I'm never leaving. I'm never ever going. And I didn't. They really had to drag me out 27 years later. But what I learnt in that period, I think, was so that the women there that were so fantastic, and that's where I learnt my 10,000 hours. You know, they were really chic women. They knew about fashion, but the fashion, you know, it wasn't just an obsession with fashion. It went right down to their lives and what they knew, and all the fashion stories that we did were based on books and philosophy. And also, you know, we would send around philosophies to every member of the staff, even the subs, to say, what was the meaning behind the story? Why was it being shot? I mean, that's all gone. And so everybody sort of felt very included in a product that you were putting out, and you would go, and there weren't all the labels that we had now and all those luxury boutiques. So you would talk to the Australian designers and take them on the journey with you and have them make clothes to fit your Ernest Hemingway story or your, you know, Klimt story or whatever. So it was a much more collaborative and creative process because we didn't have all these just get on the phone and call in exit number 14. It was really, really different. So I learnt a lot, and I think, I mean, I've worked under 3 editors. A lot of girls now go into things and they just become the editor. They're 23 years old. Oh, you're an editor. And they're lost. They haven't never had that hierarchy of, but what mistakes could you make, or what, you know, what is there. I feel for them a lot, and I talk to a lot of the young editors now and just go and have coffee with them. They've never had one, and I had a myriad of amazing women to teach me. So I was off the reception desk within about 6 months. I just put my hand up for everything. My key to career success is to make yourself useful, really. Just put your hand up for everything. I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, and you will find what you shine at. Essentially, I found I wasn't very good at taking orders, but I was really good at giving them. But I went into the beauty area for a long time. It was a very commercial area, and I loved it, travelled a lot. And then I moved to Paris, and that was probably, fell in love with a Frenchman, which is why I moved to Paris, but it was probably the best thing I ever did because I got out of that big fish in a small pond idea of here in Australia, and I was freelance. Freelance is tough. You know, anybody will tell you if you're a freelancer it's tough. You haven't got that camaraderie and that collaboration and those people backing you up. And I could, while I was in Paris, I could talk to Tom Ford in the morning, Gianfranco Ferre at lunchtime, Jacques Polge is the nose of Chanel at night, like just the people that I could actually talk to over that period of 5 to 6 years I was there was incredible. So that was a really formative period for me. I think also what I learnt from watching people for over 10 years was how to be diplomatic. And at the end, I mean, really, most of my job was diplomacy. Diplomacy between staff members, diplomacy, of course, to management, diplomacy to clients, to creatives. But I love to manage creatives because creatives are not motivated by money, ever. They're not ever, they don't care. They don't care about the bonus. They don't really care about the wage. But they care about the product, and if you can actually equip them with the materials and the idea and the vision, and they really can just run on praise. And I see that I have such huge respect for the creative. I see that being cut away nowadays with the idea that people will write for free, that you can put together things with Instagrams, that you can put things together with somebody else's Tumblr, like you'll pull some bloggers in and pretend it's your website. You know, that idea of actually recognising, nurturing, paying and appreciating a creative is just such an important part of any, it's not even publishing, it's any industry. And I think that's what we have to keep our eye on. So ultimately we'll kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Paris was marvellous. Then I came back, my children were little, it's not an easy place to raise children. Then I came back to Vogue. Management wasn't quite correct, and I went to Harper's Bazaar. So essentially I went as the deputy to set up the rival to Vogue, and they were great lessons to me because I learnt what Vogue was doing wrong. I could see what Vogue was doing wrong, and I could see what we could do right at Harper's Bazaar. And often, always your mistakes are the things that you learn the most from. If you get a reader's letter that criticises you, you can't sleep. If you get a reader's letter that says you're great, you barely finish it. It's kind of funny. Only criticism, I think, drives you forward, for me. So was at Bazaar for a while, and then was asked to go back to Vogue in '99 as editor. So I'd been at Vogue for 13 years, and I'd never been I hadn't really been ambitious. I'm still not a very ambitious person. I never sort of went to Vogue and thought, I want that top job, I'm going to get there and scratch people's eyes out. It was, that when I was offered it, I thought, well, okay, I've done every area of this business from the receptionist up. I can write, I was a journalist. I can, semi-sub. I can style, I can not very well. But I know every area of it, and I feel like, yeah, I'm ready to do this, because also important is that you're going to run a team, and you should know half of what you're doing before you're going to bring people into your orbit and ask them to put in the work that they ultimately have to put in. Vogue was pretty broken at that point. We thought, and it was another good example to me that people think you have a super brand and they're unassailable, they'll be around forever, but you can kill a brand very, very quickly. At that point, when we went back, I would suggest to you that it took me 3 years to build it back to what I felt was a standard that it should have been. You don't have that time anymore. You absolutely do not have, but bearing in mind that was '99, and I think we launched the website in 2000, but it was just a chat room. You absolutely don't have that time anymore. If you don't get it right within 2 issues, 1 issue, people's attention spans are so small, and there is so much more out there now for people to get their information from. And if they don't like what you're saying, they're going to start their own. So it was a different time, I understand that. But I think some things still apply. Well, they do. And that's to have the right people in the right jobs. Because when I got there, I was like, okay, this is broken. I had a wonderful managing director. She's still a great friend of mine. And we were working on the November issue. You probably should have about 120 pages of ads booked. We had one, and it was free of charge because somebody had stuffed something up. And so we were literally faced with this empty issue, but we had to kind of take that on the chin. And I pretty much had to restaff the entire place. But the key to everything is the right person in the right job. And I mean, the most horrible thing is to find someone. There is a way to do it. But the right people in the right jobs will get you your success in the end. And and again, not being frightened of having people in there that are better than you at other things. You know, I have met over the years editors who think that they're omniscient and that, you know, they can predict the weather and they know what a great font is and they know what a great shoe is and they know what great words are. No, they don't. You may have a general overview and you may be specifically good at some of those things, but hire people to help you do that and believe them and trust them and hope that they push back on you sometimes. But, you know, ultimately, you're only as good as your figures and it's going to be your responsibility. So you do have to have faith in your team that they've got your back. So I would say it took us 3 years to turn it around. The other point about that is, apart from putting the right people in the right seats, is the integrity of purpose that you have to keep maintain a brand. And in the 90s, in the early 2000s, there was a lot of middle management that came in, and they were like, we would make a lot more money if we were all things to all people, if we were prestige, but if we were also mastige, if we were also a little bit mass, and if we were also a little bit this, we would be able to go across so many, you know, the money would roll in. And I know for a fact that isn't true, particularly if you've got a brand that's as iconic as a Vogue or a Bazaar or a Cartier or a Chanel. You have to be very careful that your brand philosophy is not tainted and ameliorated. There are certainly ways to spin it out, clever ways, but you can't be greedy and want everything. You've got to identify your audience and talk to your audience. And you have to talk to your audience consistently. We did a lot of market research when I first went back in, and we decided, weirdly enough, the reader was our friend. And it sounds so, you know, so old-fashioned, doesn't it? But she's your friend. She trusts you. She talks to you every month. If you're consistent and you keep your conversation with her is on the same level all the time, she'll stay with you. You don't have to pull all the bells and whistles out and put free products on the cover to try and entice her. Talk to her. But, you know, that's going by the wayside because there's so much middle management coming in. It's like, whoa. The other thing is that integrity of purpose, that, you know, if you are a luxury brand, and in those days, of course, we had stationery, but you know, the flowers that are on the reception desk, the stationery, the thickness of the stationery, your business card and how raised the font was, what the Royal Doulton was when you had the business lunch, all that stuff. That's the smoke and mirrors, yes it is, but that shows that you understand that brand philosophy will go all the way through and you won't be cutting corners when you get to the product, you know, because obviously the reader is your most important ally. So I always felt very strongly about that. All the staff have to understand it, which is I liked to have a local staff and an Australian staff. I didn't really like to use freelancers that much if I could help it, because freelancers do things and then you put it together instead of having the chef create the meal from the beginning. I do like to have a tight team. I know that luxury brands, they're very precarious. They're also very alluring to people, so I understand the great, that they're a great magnet, and everybody has an opinion on them, and everybody thinks they know how to run one, and hardly anybody does. I do know that they are an irresistible magnet to frauds and wannabes and wankers. And of course, people would come to see what the brand could do for them rather than what they could do for the brand. So, you know, that was a huge part of my job, was like just trying to spot who was on the take. Yeah, the theories that came, I had a lot of management come through, and there was always, my very favourite were always the men that came in and didn't really have any interest in Vogue, would tell me what their wives thought, and then you're like, does your wife read Vogue? You're like, no. Like, all right, well, let me have it, you know, and would give you their opinion, but ultimately you always had to trust your gut and your staff. And the reader. You always had to remember the whole reason you were doing it, even though everybody has to manage up. You always have to remember the consumer. What I did love about my CEO at that point is that she really walked the floor. And it was tough at the beginning when I said we had no ad dollars, but she would walk the floor. I mean, she had the place Fung Shui, and I love it whether you believe in it or not. It was a good idea because so much had gone on before that we felt like the lines of communication were open. She was there every day, and if you wrote a great headline, or if you got an ad, or you got a great shoot-in or something, she'd personally congratulate the person at the desk. It was just words, it wasn't money, and it meant so much. And it really did feel like we turned around. We really did turn around a ship that was sinking, and it was a halcyon period. For me, it was. What I found most as we went through that was a great place. We got Vogue back on track. But what I found as we went through was that as more middle management came in, and I understand the commercial imperatives, the internet had hit. There were more rivals than any time before, so that there were a lot of business things that we had to rein in. But ultimately, the cutting of any sort of creative or content or staff was the thing that I really felt was going to be the downfall of the business. And we all understand cost cutting and getting to a particular goal at the end of a particular financial year, but if you have a vision for a company and a long-term vision for the company, the creatives are the people who are going to achieve that for you. And as I said, they're so easy to manage, I think, creatives, because they're managed by the work, and often they'd be so tired and you'd say, can you think of a supplement you'd really love to do? And you'd see their little eyes spark up like, yeah, they were prepared to do that just because they loved the work and loved the job. And I just started to see them flagging a bit, and I did think this is very dangerous when your creatives are not really on that journey with you anymore, and they feel that the number crunching is getting on top of them, and it does take a long time to get there. I remember they had so many brainstorming sessions. There were every single, all those companies that come in, and I remember one day I stood up and said, what about, and Vogue is a group of many magazines under one stable, but I got up and said, what about if you bonused creatives for really great ideas as opposed to just ad sales? And you can imagine how that went down. I mean, the ad sales teams and the managing directors are like, what did she say? But I fully believe that the creatives are undervalued, completely undervalued, and it is getting worse. Not necessarily just at Vogue, everywhere. When Robin left, I stayed under various managers that came in and out, and I found usually just to deal, I don't like to spend a lot of time managing up. I find it really emotionally exhausting. I think it is a waste of time. We all have to do it, but I just think to stay transparent and to do your work, my ethos was always head down, bum up, and just keep the sales going, because you're only ever going to be as good as your last sales. Don't every magazine editor is only good as her last circulation. The research teams, of course, come in, and I don't disagree with research, but I think research is really good to tell you what not to do, but I don't necessarily think it can tell you what to do. And again, if you're working in a magazine that's something that's iconic and supposed to inspire, with, again, the rise of social media in the internet, it was, well, why don't you go to the readers on Facebook and ask them what they want to see in the magazine? And I'm still not entirely on board with that. They buy your magazine for the surprise element. If they know exactly what they want to see in a magazine, they'll make it. So really, the originality is more important than ever. The analytics, there are analytics up the wazoo. About if we write about Weet-Bix at 9 a.m, we know that more people log on because they've got Weet-Bix and blah, blah, blah. But it's going back off the original purposes. Why is that person going to either buy your magazine, click that button, open that app or whatever? It's because you're saying something that they haven't heard before, and it's got a fresh, new, unique, interesting voice. I still believe it. I remember research groups, and they're hugely expensive, coming back with, and this is Vogue, mind you, so we are talking to a demographic that's quite bright. Women like pink, so we have to do pink cover lines. Women like shoes. This would have cost about $250,000. Women don't like to read whole pages of font without a picture in the middle. I mean, this is stuff you paid for. And it goes on, and it goes on, and ultimately, you do have to listen to it. The pressure from advertisers can't be underestimated. The commercial imperative is always there, but I do think there's an intelligent path through the middle where you can please them and please the reader. When you don't push back and you've got managers that don't have a long-term vision, you cross lines. And then, of course, that's why people went to bloggers, because they felt, ironically enough, that they had an independent voice. But because the bloggers don't have independent income, they're often at the moment the first ones to sell out. And I understand it. They haven't got any money coming in, but the lines are very blurred across all forms of media at the moment. it's not social media or the internet or anything like that that is the biggest challenge for fashion publishing. On the contrary, they're a wonderful addition if you've got a great brand and you can put your message across multimedia platforms. I don't see the end of magazines particularly, but I think they need to get better in quality. But I see books. I think books have still got, thankfully, because I've gone back to that. But they still have a future. Of course, apps, websites, tweets, Tumblrs, Instagrams, television shows, product lines, restaurants, bars, anything. If you've got a brand and your brand is valid and you have good people, you have the potential to push out into all different areas. So I'm certainly not, nobody's frightened of the end of print. But I am frightened about the end of quality. Falling ad dollars have had a huge impact, and the obvious signs of that is the reduction of contents costs, the reduction of staff, people using interns instead of trained people, using reappropriated material in the case of a Vogue, like buying it from another Vogue, so it's been somewhere before, cutting locations. I know that Vogue readers always loved it if you went to Botswana or Morocco or Samoa, and now you get half a day in a studio. Cutting pages, of course, which is again shortchanging the reader, or asking them what they want to see. I think for a super brand, you're not there to collate, you're there to innovate. I think shortchanging the consumer is the biggest threat. I think a lot of middle management could go and could put in those $55,000 creatives that make it all that much more special again, and don't underdeliver, because the readers are so educated now. It's impossible to outsmart the reader. We're not the only ones in the front row anymore. Vogue used to be the only ones, but everybody's in the front row now. You've got live streaming, you're there, you're on the spot. So you have to be really fantastic if you want to talk to somebody else. I'm going to wrap up now, because I got the thing. But I will take questions if anybody has any questions. But when Vogue turned 50 in 2009 and had a party, and the founder, Bernard Laser, got up, and it was a very noisy party, but I was listening intently because he was a gentleman, and he said very quietly, and I hope people in the room heard it, I think you should do the quality work first, and later the profits will come. And that's what I think. Thank you.